Welcome, everybody. It is Sunday, day 3 of the March Officer Club Clash. We have your third place match. We have your finals here for you today. I am your host, Christo. I am joined by jking and by Birdo Burrito. We got a lot of action for you, so let's get right into it and show you exactly what games you will be seeing here today. Let us bring up the bracket. First, we're going to have that third place match. We're going to see NoOne5 taking on Birdo. Quite a clash of the Titans. So we'll have that first as our bronze match. And then we've got the finals of the March Clash. We've got Leo taking on PyTorch. Two folks who are maybe a little bit newer to the tournament scene, but have made some really impressive showings thus far. So I am sure that finals is going to be one you're going to want to watch to see who takes home, who racks up the most points. Getting ready for the Officer Club Ultimate coming up here in just a couple of months. So we've got NoOne and Birdo first. Obviously, Birdo, hello. You're here to walk us through your thought process through this matchup, through your deck list. Again, this is there's no bans. We're through that part of the event, so you got to win with all 3 of your decks. And Birdo, why don't we start with you? You can walk us through the 3 lists you brought here today.
All right, so I had a pretty classic air and a frontline US deck, and the spice that I brought to the tournament, the Artie deck, which has fared okay so far, but you'll have to wait and see how it turns out against NoOne.
I have to say that, based on the amount of jokes we made last time about this Artie deck, it did perform fairly well, and it was actually very entertaining to watch, too. I appreciated the breath of fresh air that you brought with this Artie list.
Yeah, maybe not as consistent as if I brought something like self-damage, but I had a good time bringing it this tournament, so I don't have any regrets about it.
Awesome. So there you have Birdo's 3 lists. We've gone over these a couple times now over the last few days, so you can always check the VODs and dive in a bit more detail. But we'll have jking. You can walk us through NoOne's list quickly as well, just to get us up to speed with what NoOne is taking into this bronze match.
Alrighty, so you've seen all these 3 before. His first deck here is Britain, Japan, Air. Nothing too special. It is a little bit off. He does run these Type 93s. He does not run the air superiorities. It's a bit more aggressive, which very much fits NoOne's style. His second deck is his signature German US Heinz deck. NoOne loves this deck. He plays it very aggressive, triple blitzkrieg. It is just gunning it for the opponent's HQ. And then his third deck, quite different than the first 2. It is his Soviet US, similar to Birdo's Artie, with the nations, but very different in the playstyle. It is a US Soviet control deck with a little bit of ramp. It has those 4 war machines, but doesn't commit too much into it. And then it's just running those big Soviet bombs, like the KVs, the Partisans, the 272nds, the Tractor Factories, and then to round it all off, it has B-17 Flying Fortress with Ural Factories to get some extra Pershings that you might need to close out the game. So that is a pretty different lineup than Birdo's. So I'm expecting a very good best of 5 with no bans. We're going to see, hopefully, all 6 of these decks.
Well, let's get to the action then. Keep in mind, this is the bronze match. This is for 15 points, finishing in third, 12 points if you finish in fourth. First and second are 25 and 18 respectively. So you've got some points on the line here trying to get into the Officer Club Ultimate? Officer Club Championship Ultimate? The OCC yes. Ultimate. Just the Ultimate. But we're leaving there. That will be in May at this point. So there you've got NoOne, there you got Birdo. As we mentioned, it's going to be best of 5. There will be no bans. You got to win with all 3 of your lists in this Conquest format to win the third place spot here in the March Clash.
All right, heading into game 1, we see NoOne is going to be bringing his Soviet US ramp, and Birdo's going to be bringing his air deck. And I have to say, just based on the matchups, I think Birdo is pretty heavily favored into this. I think air is definitely the deck NoOne would have liked to have banned if there was a ban. But in a best of 5 situation, if you make it to the finals, you don't get a ban. And we'll see if Birdo's air deck does what it's intended to do, which is just be a free win once you get past the ban stages of the tournament.
Nah, if he had a ban, I'm sure he would have banned Artie for sure every time. It's too scary. Brings back too many memories. That was one of my considerations, though, when I brought Artie, is How many of these players have played against Artie before? Like, who was around for that meta? And how many people during that meta were so traumatized by the deck that they don't want to play against it?
So a little bit of cards history while we're just going through the first early motions of these turns and no one decides on what elite he's looking for. But Soviet US artillery did actually used to be the most popular and probably the strongest deck in the game for several months at a time throughout a long stretch of tournament history. You just had exclusively Artie. But several nerfs, it dropped off the map, different changes to different cards. So Birdo bringing it back, it's a little, as he said, it's quite spicy. What else is quite spicy is no one picking up that 39th Rifle Regiment, which it is so incredibly powerful against air, and especially against the Aichi, which Birdo currently has on board.
Yeah, these non-damaged based removals like Sudden Strike, like Flame Panzer, and 39th is and the other stealing effects from Soviets are just so good against air because air is built around using low statted units, but then buffing them up to a point where they're really powerful, far above what you initially paid for them. So if you're able to deal with something that costs 2, well, it still costs 2, even though it's a 3/5 bomber, which is a stat line which you would expect at a much higher cost if it was just a vanilla unit.
And very powerful opening board from Birdo, but what we also see in no one's hand is his single copy of Stars and Stripes, which, I mean, he doesn't need to live long enough to play it because he is currently staring down 10 damage.
Yeah, a bit unfortunate for knowing that turn, not really having any plays on the 4 credits, and having the Bryansk irregulars not doing enough much at all against a board entirely of bombers.
And here we see the power of the close air support. And as Boda was talking about the buffing these cheap units so much that damage-based removal doesn't deal with them, Stars and Stripes is an incredibly powerful card against Brit Air. But in this case, it would only deal 3 damage to all the units, and all of them have more than 3 health. So no one instead plays the 39th Rifles, takes the highest attack unit, the most powerful unit on the board, but Birdo is 3 off lethal, or 1 credit off lethal if he with that Empire Strikes. And as it's been mentioned before, no one's deck does not have a lot of healing. It's only the 1 copy of Engineers, and if Birdo has been hand tracking, he knows that Heroes of the Soviet Union got the 39th, so that's another shot at a possible Engineers gone. So Birdo knows he can just go face, deal the 3 damage. If one of these bombers sticks, next turn he can do Albacore, Empire Strikes, even through a potential fighter if no one finds his copy of Yak. But there's nothing, no one knows it, and surrenders on turn 6, and yeah, this is why air has been banned in almost every single round throughout the tournament from every single player.
Yeah, it's almost like it's good or something.
Going into that, like jking, the first thing you called out was this should be a free win, and it kind of felt like that. So no one going into game 2, does he just think, all right, there's my ban, that's gone out of the way, we're good now, we're still in good shape, or is he panicking a little bit after having lost that first matchup?
I think if you know, and you're pretty fine going into that matchup, you know your Soviet control deck should be all right against anything other than air, and you know nothing in your lineup's going to be spectacular into air. So you think if they bring air in the first game, I'm probably going to lose, and that's perfectly fine. And I also know no one is just a very calm player, and we see now he's bringing his own air deck. It similarly could be considered a quote-unquote free win, although I think Artie is going to give it a much tougher fight than that Soviet ramp deck, because Artie does have these cheap units that can contest the early game. It has these fighters like the Chaika, which are very, very frustrating to deal with as an air player, and if you can find them and stick them, the AA guns, which give all enemy air units +2 operation cost, can essentially grind the opponent's air, their board to a halt and just keep it in a standstill while you pick it off with these buffed up arties.
Yeah, and it does often come down to can Noan 5 find the Empire strikes in this kind of matchup? Because that's such a powerful tool against Artie. I have a little bit of some ways to play around it in this deck, with particularly the We Can Do It's. But there's only 2 of them, and sometimes it's not enough if you're able to get 4 bombers on the board.
And looking at Noan's hand, it is the hand of aggression that his deck is clearly built towards. With these 3 copies of Type 93 and 2 copies of Naval Supply Run, he's finding all of that, but that's not working as well against a deck that's going to be contesting you. These cards like Type 93 you would rather have against control decks where you're able to close out the game faster, put the pressure on faster. But against a deck that's going to be contesting you unit for unit throughout the entire game, Type 93 is not nearly as impactful. Naval Supply Run is not nearly as impactful if you can't play it on a large board. And we'll see the first Naval Supply Run comes out, he can take out the Greyhound, but now he's going to be losing a card next turn on top of this. And his boards, I mean, the Swordfish can stick in theory, but this Chika is going to be able to slow it down, and there's a chance no one loses the Empire Strikes.
Yeah, also losing the Convoy could also be pretty detrimental. Air has a lot of draw, but it can certainly run out at any point in the game and get put into a really precarious spot where you really need to be using your credits efficiently, and if you don't have the draw, then you're just going to be forced to float a lot of credits in the coming turns.
Loses the 26th Engineer Regiment, which is another Noan classic. He loves that card. He loves to put in 1 copy of that card into any air deck he builds, it seems. And, well, that is quite a good card. I'm sure he's happy that it didn't hit the Convoy. He's happy it didn't hit the Empire Strikes. And he's going to be pretty happy it didn't hit that Aichi he drew, because that's going to be a pretty good card moving forward. And by attacking with the Swordfish first, he does completely take out the Chika. Birdo gets the 50-50 on the Katyusha to take out the Swordfish. You did have the sickle in hand, in case the Katyusha did not gift him with that. And the Brion's Regiment is just going to slow this Type 93 down. And I'm curious, Birdo, in this situation, what would you value? How would you evaluate your odds of winning the game from this current situation? Not knowing what's in his hand.
I think I was evaluating my position pretty highly because I've already gotten through a copy of the Empire Strikes, which is, in my mind, one of the most important cards in the matchup. Although after that Albacore, it starts to feel a lot harder to deal with these bombers, and all of a sudden I'm very aware of how easily my board might be dealt with over the next few turns.
Yeah, that is true. Well, Empire Strikes, it does create the flashiest turns from air, where you throw down several cheap bombers and take out a huge board from the opponent. Just these small fighters, or small bombers, sticking around, getting their attacks in, will just chip away at the opponent's board over time. You don't need these huge AoEs if they just have unanswered bombers in the support line.
Yeah, and that was a bit of an awkward turn for me. I certainly wanted to get that Type 93 killed, but with all these 5-cost orders in hand, I also felt like I couldn't float 4 credits either.
And we see no one's able to be dealing with these units, and he's building up a board, but none of these units are necessarily the highest health. If this 5U plan can find a couple sickles, a couple Katyushas, this board can start falling rather quickly, and the 5 damage from 5U plan, well, that in some situations seems like a lot. It seems like too much to justify it. In this situation, Birdo sitting at full health when he plays it. 14, you're pretty happy with that, especially with the engineers pickup, meaning that you don't really have to worry about health for at least as long as you have cards to be playing.
Yeah, and very fortunate for me to have that card in this situation when I'm running low on cards, particularly in a matchup where those resources are so important. This deck sometimes tends to rely on just getting the artillery out early and just gaining your advantage by constantly trading into everything that they play, which can mean that you don't need a lot of draw in the deck in matchups against things like Jagro, but against air, when they have so many tools, so much removal, it really becomes more a war of attrition in a lot of games.
However, the one advantage that you have against Noan's deck that you wouldn't have against the typical air deck is his choice to not run air superiority means that these AA guns are much harder for him to deal with. And as we see, that slowed Noan down quite a bit. That got 4 extra credits out of him, meaning he can't play the close air support this turn. And now this Ura's looking pretty good. You can trade off the Bryansk, get rid of the Piracy if you want.
I'm not sure that I should have played it, actually, because I think in this moment I forgot that I can just trade into the Piracy and the Bryansk will kill the unit anyways, because of course it is dealing damage.
That is true, and then that unlocks the front line, allowing you to get the Greyhound in, getting the +2 attack onto the AA gun.
And I'm not sure if you saw that, but I just played Zukov to get no unit, because I have already found both Bryansk, the first rifle, and the engineers. So that puts me in a really rough spot.
And that is the downside. That is an Artie classic. The Zukov with no units left in your deck. I mean, props to Birdo for actually building his deck around this, running the 4 Soviet units, whereas the original Artie deck back in the day only ran Cuban Cossacks. So if you just needed to find your Zukov before your Cuban Cossacks. But very unfortunately, Birdo manages to find all 4 Soviet units before the Zukov. And in a deck that lacks draw, the 5-year plan is really the main draw engine, and it's been played. So this, well, the hands are looking relatively equal in size now. Noan's deck still has 2 Lend-Leases and several Convoys, whereas Birdo's deck doesn't. And it's looking difficult, I would say. That is actually might be a bit of an understatement. I am struggling to see how Birdo can possibly find a way to deal 18 damage before Brit Air will inevitably find their card draw. Even if no one manages to not find anything in the next 5 cards, in the next 6, or like 6 cards, 7 cards into their deck, they don't find any card draw. I don't see Birdo with 6 or 7 extra cards being able to deal 18 damage against this full support line from no one.
Especially when I burned that Ura earlier, which appears to be even more of a mistake in hindsight once we get to this board state and this situation. And
Well,
another close air support. Not really what no one wants, but not bad either.
Yeah, you're never going to complain about drawing a close air support when you have a full board. And
it's just slightly late into the game compared to where it's optimal. But if I'm drawing 1 and 2 cost cards and he's drawing 1 and 2 cost cards, then he's still in a pretty content position here.
This Chaika makes everything a little bit awkward. The Engineers makes everything take a little bit longer, but I mean, it looks like Air, we are just slowly marching towards Air's second victory in this series. However, I don't think you can really call this one a free win. No one's definitely had to fight for it. Another sickle draw that's probably the best card in Birdo's deck at this point, but again, it doesn't really matter because unless he just generates a 39th Rifle Regiment out of thin air to take this Aichi, this is going to stick, and yeah, these infantries are not going to be doing anything. This engineers doesn't do anything. This Katyusha has a 50% chance to take out the RAF, but the 5/5 bomber can just go face. I mean, he'll probably trade. It's correct to trade. Birdo wins the 50-50, but I mean, what is he supposed to do?
Probably cry about it.
And there's the Lend-Lease draw. You can't really say, oh, that was a really lucky draw from no one, because there's so much card draw in his deck. There's almost no bad draws in no one's deck for him.
Yeah, it's really just the card that cements the game that no one already nearly had complete control over.
Tenth Engineers not doing a lot, and I would not be shocked if Birdo surrendered this turn.
Me neither. I can't remember if I do or not.
There it goes. No one ties up the series 1-1 with Air winning both of its games.
It's like it just got banned.
Now, best of 3, no air. Exactly like it got banned.
It is important to keep in mind what these players are fighting for, because Birdo, in the previous OCC clash, did place third, meaning he has 15 points. No one got knocked out in the quarterfinals, meaning he has 8 points. Birdo here, win or lose, is going to be in a very comfortable position for qualifying to the OCC Ultimate. No one here is not quite in yet. He's going to need another performance. Win or lose, he's going to need another performance in April. But he's going to want as many points as he can get out of this one. He's going to want that win for those 3 extra points. And Heinz into Artie, not a matchup you want to have for Heinz. And we see the reason for that being that tank gun coming down onto the board that has +2 attack against all tank units and has ambush. And no one's deck is virtually 100% tank units, meaning he needs 2 units to attack into it to trade, but that still requires him having the credits to get up there. That requires him having one of them having at least 2 attack to be able to kill the artillery following that. And this artillery is going to be attacking every single turn on Birdo, taking away these tank units. No one's main hope for dealing with it right now was sticking that auto canone. That is not going to happen with the second Greyhound moving forward. Meaning
Although there is a lot of strength in the smoke screen to give Noen the ability to develop the board while not immediately getting all of his things traded out by Artie.
This is true. Noen's Heinz deck does have quite a few smokescreen units, and we see all 3 units on his side of the board right now do have smokescreen, meaning that these cheap artilleries aren't getting a huge advantage that they might normally have of being able to chip off the opponent's units. However, another great thing about these cheap artilleries is they deal a lot of damage very, very quickly, and we see Noen playing one of the most aggressive decks in the game is already down. He's down to 13 health on turn 5.
But this Greif in combination with these low-cost units and the +3 attack from the Panzer WWII, is it, if I remember correctly?
Yep, definitely a Panzer E.
Gives Noen an avenue back into this game.
And that is the explosive turns. That is an example of one of those explosive turns that Heinz is known for. Because look at that, Noen started that turn 3 units, all in the support line, not doing a lot. Birdo with 4 units, 5 units on board, counting the engineers. And suddenly it's completely flipped. Noen has 4 units and control of the front line, and Birdo has 1 unit being the engineers. Takes the risk of going for the 5-year plan, but I think correctly evaluates that without finding that bloody sickle off the 5-year plan, you're not going to win anyways if you just do Katyusha attack. Your Katy's going to get picked off. You need to be able to play the draws. And looking at Noen's hand right now, I suspect I know where this game is going. The Zukov pickup is very good because 100% of the cards that it will draw have guard. And Zukov into first rifles with Blitz to take out the Greif is a huge swing turn right there for Birdo.
No one is finding some of his very important draw in the situation, the Heinkel and the Martyr 3, which allows him to stay in it, not just run dry on resources. Similarly to how I needed to find my 5-year plan in this match as well.
Here comes the Katyusha. There's no possible ways to buff it. There's no other blitz units coming out. There's no pings. There's nothing. But Birdo doesn't need any of it because Birdo gets another Katyusha high roll. And I'm starting to understand why he brought the Audi deck. I mean, if your Katyushas are just 2/2 Audis with blitz, I'd run them too.
I'm definitely getting fortunate in these games. It's a lot of blitzkriegs, but the first rifles is a really big issue to get that damage through.
Yeah, I think you're often happy seeing a blitzkrieg. You're often happy seeing 2 blitzkriegs. I don't think you're really ever happy seeing 3 blitzkriegs because there's no world where your deck, well, no one's Heinz deck has enough card draw where having 3 blitzkriegs, he will also be in a situation where he has enough cards to use those 3 blitzkriegs. He spoils of war into the 38T, just generating another tank body to get onto the board to potentially buff with these blitzkriegs. Draws into another martyr. Goes for these very awkward trades to... I think the idea is to keep the Heinkel alive. However, the Katyusha sticks on the board, so the Heinkel's going to die either way. And here, Birdo's in a very good opportunity to come back into this game. But this Engineers is starting to feel a little awkward, because it's starting to feel like it's taking up a very valuable spot in the very limited size of the support line. And Audi is a deck where you love your support line units. Most of your units want to stay in the support line, and very few of your units can get out of the support line the turn they are played. So Bird is just going to push up the Engineers, and now he has a choice between either buffing it with the 99th, he can buff the Caddy with the 99th, or, I like this play quite a lot, just get down the Petliakov. There's a couple very annoying deployment effects in Heinz, and we see one of them drawn right there. It's the Jagdbomber. And I'm struggling to see how no one can pull himself out of this one. I mean, if he's going to do it, it's going to involve probably at least 2 of those 3 blitzkriegs in his hand. The placement of the Petliakov on the left to protect it does mean his Birdo's HQ is open if no one can somehow get through, take control of the front line without losing all of his units in the process.
You have to consider, Birdo Burrito, pretty well known for his scrows, could lose this game still, even in such a dominating position. It wouldn't be the first time that somebody's forgotten about a Petliakov with their own units.
Oh no, please. Please no. Birdo's Petliakov is blocking the deployment effect of his own 99th. However, something he could do is trade in the Petliakov to the Jagdbomber, then play a 99th to buff the Katyusha, attack, and then play a second Petliakov, which is a bit of a roundabout way of getting around the fact that you are blocking your own important deployment effects with this card. And it looks like that's exactly what he's going to do. Trades out the Petliakov, then gets the 99th to buff the Katyusha.
But the double bait, it was a different mistake the whole time, and he clogs his support line with the first rifles.
So
what an idiot!
Birdo decides that he would rather have a 1-1 artillery than a 3-4 guard. Because his support line is full, first rifles reads a destruction, summon the second rifles in your support line, not in the same line. So the support line being full means that when this first rifles dies, the second rifles just disappears. It never comes. And no one I mean, if there was a way back into this game, he's definitely looking for it. Heinz is just one of those decks that never quite seems to give up. All of these cards seem to manage to draw one other card to replace them, and you're constantly, the longer the game goes on, the more number of blitzkriegs you have to be afraid of.
Yeah, in that situation, it was a big mistake to fill my support line like that. I did not need that anti-air gun down. But you have to remember that I was just coming off the loss against PyTorch when I struggled with this Artie deck as well. A little bit of a lack of familiarity being a bit of a problem for me. And it's showing that I am not nearly as practiced on this deck as I once used to be, and there's also a lot of differences these days.
And that is one of those risks of trying to do something different. There's definitely something to be said about trying to just bring what's meta. And the reason bringing what's meta is good, it's not just because it's meta because it's the best decks in the game. There's certainly arguments that you can discover very good tournament decks that might otherwise never see play on ladder. But the decks that you play on ladder every single day, you are getting valuable experience, even if it doesn't seem like it when you're just smashing your head against complete randos playing ramp every day and you're trying to just grind out your like 100 Brit Air games a day. It might not seem like it's valuable, but that is valuable. If you just pick a deck because you think it looks good but you haven't played it, it's very easy to make these small mistakes that you might not immediately think of well in a game, in a tournament situation.
jking, I want to ask how relatable you think it is to say when you're grinding out your 100 Brit Air wins on ladder per day.
I'd like to point out that jking said 100 games, and you, Berto, brought up 100 wins.
Oh,
I see
it's only a
same thing.
tiny difference between those two numbers, though.
And no one held on for quite some time, but he never was able to really cement himself in the front line, was never able to use those blitzkriegs, and just the constant pressure from these artilleries means he's going to surrender, even though he has a decently high health total.
Despite Berto's best attempts, he still wins.
And now, no one with his back against the wall decides he wants to go back to his Soviet-US ramp, and he's going to be against Frontline, and this is going to be a much more comfortable matchup for him than the air one. I wouldn't go as far as to say either player is particularly favored. Soviet controls, very powerful late game bombs can definitely, if they come down quick enough and if no one is able to stabilize the board enough, then US Frontline's real lack of strong removal is going to come into play, where it can't easily deal with these huge units coming down turn after turn after turn, whereas Berto is just going to be trying to play for entirely around tempo. He's going to be trying to build as big a board as possible, as quickly as possible, to try to end these games with the blitzkriegs.
And my 30 seconds getting a little impatient, coming a little too soon. Not when they're called for, but just off their own accord, which I don't particularly appreciate, but I don't have much of a say in the matter. I kept quite a few cards in hand. In part, you often keep more cards in hand with this deck because you know you could get multiple 30 seconds in your opening hand. But
And
just drawing one isn't too big of a deal.
And looking at Noen's hand, Noen's deck has just so many elites in it. It's about halfway to being a singleton deck. And every single one of these elites is so powerful that it feels like you're getting lucky if you see a single one of them. It's like, of course they found their yak. Well, they have like 20 elites in the deck. Every single one of them is a single copy. And we see he gets the War Machine into the Armored Train on turn 4. This is a card that can exclusively be dealt with for a 1-for-1 trade with a Hellcat that is not in Berto's hand. And this 39th Rifles, still in no one's hand, is going to be quite scary. And if Berto just tries to flood out units onto the board, the one copy of Stars and Stripes sitting in no one's hand is going to punish him very hard, especially if he goes for that Skytrain that he just top decked. That's looking pretty tempting.
And you may have noticed on the mulligan, I put a lot of thought into keeping Hellcat, because it is a very powerful card in this matchup. But I checked Rudone's deck lists. I knew that the Armored Train was the only thing that came out fast that I would need it into. And I thought, it's a one card in his deck. I probably shouldn't keep it just for the one card. But did not work out as I planned.
And we see the Stars and Stripes combined with the Sickle takes out the entire board, no one trading with the Light Infantry first to set up this buffed Red Devils, which at this point looking fine for Birdo. However, with the 39th Rifles in hand, I mean that this buffed Red Devils is just going to be a buffed Red Devils for no one.
And Engineer Battalion, no one's one form of heal, but it's not really a spot in the game where it looks like he even needs the heal. With all these guards, all this removal, it looks like no one has a very strong chance to be denying the front line from the frontline deck, which is always a recipe for disaster.
And I actually really like this play from Noen. It's quite reserved and it's quite patient. He's has the ability to just immediately slam 39th Rifles, take the 2-4 Red Devils, but instead plays the 5th Rangers, he plays the War Machine, gets access to more credits, and he gets this 0 operation cost unit on board that's going to be capable of dealing with anything from Birdo. Now, he is playing a pretty big risk of playing directly into Strategic Bombing. However, Strategic Bombing, it's a 1-of copy in Birdo's deck, and
and this is the second time I want Stars and Stripes in the situation, and I draw the 101st that I replaced Stars and Stripes with.
And I mean, yeah, this is no one is showing the strength of these singleton archetype Soviet control decks. I'm just saying, maybe singleton Soviet control is meta after all. Maybe I was on to something.
Maybe.
Birdo goes for the we can do it, pushes a 6-4 light infantry, or not light infantry, a 6-4 32nd into the front line.
Well, it was a 4-4 when I moved it up.
And no one now, he can, I mean, everything feels a little bit awkward, but he's winning by so much, he's perfectly fine with it.
I don't know if I call that awkward.
And with the hammer, he's taken the 2-7 Red Devils, and I mean, Frontline is capable of some pretty miraculous comebacks. That is not a situation where that is going to happen. And the perfect comedic timing, Birdo surrenders despite being at full health, because that game is just completely run away from him.
Yeah, getting a ton of value off of that armored train. All those light infantry coming out, dealing with those 30 seconds.
And we are already 5 turns into game 5, apparently. And it is the Heinz versus US midrange. And this is a pretty favorable matchup for US midrange. However, it's one of those matchups where if you are losing, it's going to feel really, really bad. And it's going to take a while. This is not a just one and done matchup. And looking at it so far, I mean, we missed the first few turns, but this game is looking like quite a slog. No one has a decent hand. He has a decent board. So does Birdo. And I mean, yeah, this 5th Rangers is going to be key. This strategic bombing is going to be key.
I think what really plays a big role in this matchup is that the US midrange deck is very consistent with the things that the deck is doing, whereas Heinz has these really high potential, these explosive turns that can really come out of nowhere and ruin the day for the US mid-range. But, consistency is not to be overlooked at all. The humble 30-second calling in his friends can do a lot of work, even if a 1k 2-1 infantry on its own is not very impressive.
And here, no one, once again, taking a bit of a risk. I mean, it's difficult for him not to play into strategic bombing, but unlike last game, Bodo actually does have the strategic bombing this turn. So it's going to take out the Panzer F, it's going to take out the Panzer A, and it's going to limit no one another credit slot, which is going to be very massive going forward in this game.
And look at this PAR. He's barely selfish at all. He's sharing the gifts of kindness of that +2 attack across these 30 seconds, which is also making quite a big deal.
Unfortunately, I couldn't get to all of them in time, and no one is able to pick off the last 2 attack 30-second, drawing another card with 22nd, and this is how this matchup needs to be played by both players, really. Just grinding the game down, getting those valuable trades, not just trying to go all face, not just trying to flood the board as quickly as possible. You're trying to find the good trades where you can take them, and Bodo would really love to take out this Panzer E. That is a very annoying unit. It's going to be buffing all of no one's blitz tanks, and he has a lot of them in his deck. However, it still has Smokescreen. Bodo does not have a way to deal with it, so instead he's going to play the Whirlwind and get that value trade onto the 22nd. We saw no one doing a very similar thing on his turn with the Panzer A. They're just picking off these units that can be killed without losing a unit in return, because neither deck has any of these sweeping AoEs. There's no root outs, supply shortages, Empire strikes. Every single unit virtually needs to be traded with another unit. So anytime you can kill a unit without losing a unit, you're going to want to do it.
Now, even though you talk about how this matchup isn't really about hitting your opponent's HQ, you can have extreme amounts of damage coming from nowhere when both decks run blitzkriegs. So it can sort of create these interesting situations where you're like playing for board because you never want to give your opponent an opportunity, and then you say, wait a second, I know he's at 19 health, but can I kill him?
Yeah, and we see Bodo this turn. If that Combat Engineers had been one of the 2 Blitzkriegs in his deck, that would have just been lethal. The game would have ended right there. But if Bodo decides, you know what, I'm going to play this aggressive, I'm just going to push face for 10, and, I don't know, play like a showman or something, it's possible that no one in 1 or 2 turns could turn that right around. We see these 2 Blitzkriegs in his hand. So that is why it is so important to take the trades when you can. And Bodo looks like he's going to be going for the aggressive path. He's going to drop no one to 2, but unlike a much more passive play like playing a Sherman, this is putting 3 units into the front line. These still need to be traded out. So now no one has a job, which is trade out all 3 of these units and take the front line. However, looking at Bodo's hand...
And take the front line with more than a 1 health unit, or else this 35T will get there. Of course, not that no one knows.
And seeing the 5th Rangers, no one needs to take it with more than a 4 health unit, more than a 5 health unit, or 2 units, and one of them both have more than 1 health. No one has really been given a pretty impossible task here. These 2 weakened duets can bring everything out of range. However, he's not going to have the credits to make all of the trades in that case. So either way, it's looking like this is just going to be game. Bodo finding the exact situation to put on the pressure, seeing that he's running out of resources, no one is not. However, he has control of the front line, work with what you got, go all face on 1 turn of weakness. And, I mean, not knowing no one's hand, going for this play, you could very easily be blown out by just a Greyhound into a Greyhound into a Greyhound into a Greyhound, and then suddenly you've completely lost control of the board. However, no one's hand, we see 2 Blitzkriegs, 2 weakened duets. These are not units. These cannot stop the 35P from moving forward and dealing the last bit of damage, giving Bodo the 3-2 win over... Is it fair to call no one your nemesis?
I'll say rival.
I was definitely going nemesis with that as well, jking, so I'm on the same page as you. It sounds so much more epic that way. So there you see it. Birdo defeating Noen 3-2. Hard fought series, tight. Birdo ends up with 15 big old points towards the OCC Ultimate. How are you feeling based
I
off,
mean,
defeating Noen?
What can I say? That's the arty difference. No, it was a very hard fought series, and I mean, clearly from the games, it could have gone either way. But I'm glad the games were pretty close. And I mean, I'm happy to get those extra 3 points in my pocket for this upcoming Ultimate.
Well, congratulations, Birdo. Despite your best efforts, you did, in fact, win third place. And next up, we're going to have the final, so stay tuned. It is going to be PY Torch versus Leo to find out who will be the OCC champion for March. Welcome back, everybody. It is now time for the grand finals for the Officer Club Clash of March. It all boils down to this. We've got Leo versus PyTorch. Winner takes home 25 points towards the Ultimate. Second place gets 18. Whoever wins this is going to be in a pretty decent spot to get into the Ultimate in May. So without further ado, let's dive into the decks and take a quick peek before we jump into the first game. Let's bring up Leo's decks. And Berto, why don't you walk us through quickly what we've got here today?
Yeah, so we have a classic US frontline running Stars and Stripes, which might help in some of these matchups.
Speaking from experience, much?
Yeah, sometimes it comes up, it turns out. And then instead of Brit Air, we have a Brit Germany discard deck, which is very powerful as well. And we also have a Soviet France control deck, which can really slow things down a lot. Has all these guards and a lot of removal, even double Scorched Earth. So can make some intense games.
Right on. So let's flip over to the other side and see what PyTorch is bringing to combat that. jking, take us away.
So on PyTorch's end, his first deck is the Britain-Japan Air, which is normally the deck that you want to see banned, but knowing Leo, I think Leo's lineup is pretty favorable into it, and with no bans in this best-of-5 finals, it's going to be interesting to see if this Brit Air is going to be that quote-unquote free win that we saw in the third place match. Then moving on to the second game, or the second deck, sorry, it is the Feigned Retreat Jagro. This is a very, very aggressive deck. And it's going to be interesting to see how it goes up into both the discard from Leo and the Soviet France control from Leo, because these are both capable of shutting Jagro down, but if you get an early Feigned, if you get the good opening hand, Feigned is able to just take the game very, very quickly and be a quote-unquote free win. And then, similar to Noen, those two aggressive decks aside, his third deck is going to be a Soviet control, but unlike Noen's a Soviet-US ramp, this is going to be very similar to Leo's Soviet France control that is much more interested in shutting down these aggressive decks. It has the Scorched Earths, but it still definitely has a good amount of value in it with 2 Spy Rings. It has the Tractor Factories, 2 72nd Guards, and, of course, the Rimas, which are just going to be able to buff up these huge boards. So it's going to be very interesting to see how these line up into each other.
Well, we're about to find out. We're moments away from jumping into this best of 5 to determine the winner of the March Officer Club Clash. And here we are. As mentioned, no bans, best of 5. PyTorch and Leo going head to head here. Let's get into game 1.
And something that's very interesting is neither of these players participated in the top 38 at any step through the entirety of the February OCC system. So both of these players are sitting on 0 points going into this. However, they're fighting for first place, which is 25 points, which 25 is going to be a very good number. It might even be enough to get into the Ultimate on its own. So this shows that in this current system, you don't need to show up every single tournament if you just have one very strong performance, and both Leo and PyTorch have had very strong performances to get here, and now it's going to be very interesting to see them going into each other. We have Feigned Retreat versus Discard.
And that's a lot of board clears in Leo's hand already to go up against this Jagro deck.
Yes,
3 in opening hand.
the supply shortage, the root out, and the shelling are. I mean, as we see PyTorch's hand, all of these units have 1 health. So supply shortage, root out, and shelling are going to be 3 consecutive board clears and a second root out pickup. Leo is going to have absolutely no trouble dealing with anything PyTorch puts out here. And
although this is 6 damage,
yeah,
and he's still a turn off.
Leo doesn't have anything on this turn. He's passing, so he's taking an additional 6 damage.
If not 8, by moving up one of those Type 94s, which is what I would like to see from PyTorch. You know all the board clears in this deck. You don't want to extend too hard. And this 2 damage could be relevant in the future, in addition.
And this is making Leo very thankful for basically the one thing in his hand that's not a board clear, the Fortification, which is going to be able to heal him back off of 6 health, which is what he is currently sitting at. And, I mean, this game is going to be very, very close. This game could end in 2 turns. This game could go on for another 15, 20 turns. Because with PyTorch's deck, yes, he's had this very explosive early aggression, and yes, Leo is now able to lock down the board. This Aichi is going to be very effective at getting around that. However, if PyTorch is able to pick up a Feigned Retreat, suddenly his hand goes from 1 card to 2 cards to unlocking his entire deck, and no amount of discard is going to get around that.
Yeah, this IG is really an issue. It's just so sticky and so hard to deal with, especially when it comes out so early in the game. And most other units in PyTorch's deck, Leo can just play a root out, play a shelling, and wipe his hands of the whole situation, but not with this Aichi.
And Leo's suddenly in a very awkward position because he can Fog of War the Yokosuka. He guarantees that his opponent has 1 card in hand plus Yokosuka as the next 2 draws. So as long as that 1 card in hand is not something too scary, you're going to be fine, but you're not dealing with the Aichi. You're not healing. So you're going to be dropping down to 4. And he does go for the Fog of War, which, I mean, looking at the board, I think this is the correct play, but if you are Leo, you are crossing your fingers that there's not another Aichi, that there's not a key, that there's not a Shiden that's coming down.
And you have to imagine PyTorch wants to get this attack in, get this 2 damage in. And then he can only get 1 of these infantry up, which means Leo has the opportunity to raft this Akita to the back line and protect himself fully from this bomber, with the infantry, of course, being delayed by a full turn. And then, if PyTorch fully extends out to try to desperately get the last bit of damage in, then Leo's going to be able to trade this Wrath Lightning into this bomber and root out with perfect credits.
And this is what I love about the Handlock deck from Leo. This is honestly one of my favorite decks in the game to play because it gets you into these situations where you have, at least for a few turns, a quote-unquote solved game where you know what your opponent's next draw is. Leo, because of the Fog of War, knew his opponent was drawing the Yokosuka. He has intel on the surprise attack in hand, and he knows the other card in hand was the previous Yokosuka drawn on the previous turn. So he knows when he plays this Wrath, he doesn't have to worry about top decking a Shiden. He doesn't have to worry about a Rado into Feigned. He knows exactly what resources his opponent is going to have access to, and he is going to know exactly how to play around that. And PyTorch is taking an interesting line. He has real 2 approaches to this. He can play it slow, like what he's doing, try to conserve resources through a board clear, or you can just fully commit to the board, throw out everything, pin the Wrath. And honestly, I prefer the going all out in this play. You don't really want cards in your hand because once the discard starts rolling, cards in your hand can either be sent back to deck by MI5, or they can be discarded by Case Yellow, by Wolfpack, by Annihilation.
Yeah, it's just so hard to play around board clears when all your units have 1 or 2 defense.
And we see Leo can clear the board here, but if Akita goes face, PyTorch will have a top deck for lethal. Any Blitz tank, Akita does go face, there's Desperate Measures, there's Whirlwinds, there's 35 Ts, but none of those are what is found. It's a second Akita, which you might put Leo on the edge of his seat if it was not for this one fortification that's been in his hand since turn 1 that's going to be able to heal him back up to 9 and put him quite comfortably away from death's door. However, at any point, PyTorch could top deck a Feigned Retreat, and suddenly this game is completely turned on its head. And that is the situation Leo is in. The board is clear. His Wrath is gone. He's back down to 7 health. And now what does his opponent draw? Is it a Shiden? Is it a Key? Is it a Feigned Retreat? It is a Befelswagen, which...
about as good as those other ones.
I think, arguably, this is one of the worst cards you could have drawn, because you're now even going to have to spend extra credits moving. If you draw a Shiden next turn, you can't attack with the Shiden and the Befelswagen, unlike a Cavalry Regiment or anything else. And that Convoy finds 2 Wolf Packs, and each of those is going to deny a draw, which once again gives Leo access to these solved turns, where he's going to know what his opponent has access to. This Sendai is going to get through the Blackwatch, is going to let him get Leo down to 5 health, but if Leo wants, he can just play a Wolfpack, and yes, he'll drop down to 3, but he knows his opponent's not going to have anything. Now, obviously, he doesn't need to do this. He can just play a Blackwatch, he can shell in, he can play His Majesty's Chosen.
One of the things that I want to point out about Leo's play here is that everything he needed to do was very precise regarding the healing and the board clears, and keeping that fortification precisely until the turn he did, I think can single-handedly decide this game, and a weaker player might have very easily been scared to see their health so low and used it earlier without getting these answers out, which would have given PyTorch time to get through the healing the turn that it's played.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Your health total, as long as it's not 0, whatever the number is does not matter. And Leo is very much using this to his advantage. He knows how much burst his opponent's capable of putting out. He knows what the odds of any card in his opponent's deck is. So he knows the risks he is taking, and he's carefully towing that line. And here goes for this Majesty's Chosen, picks up a Pioneer. This is going to reduce the cost of these Wolf Packs. It's going to reduce the cost of the Convoy. It's going to make these turns much cheaper. Key is a very good draw. However, it's immediately going to be answered by a Wrath Lightning into a Wolf Pack to destroy the Key and leave PyTorch with absolutely nothing.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why Wrath can be so powerful in discard, because your opponent is going to try to play around discard by getting things out of their hand, but if you can just put them back, you can eke out just a little more value. And we might even see the double 85th Pioneer Company.
For those 3 credits Wolf Packs, if he really wants to go for it, it would also let him draw with a 1 credit Convoy.
Yeah, that's like an expansion. Without condition.
However, he might not want to overcommit into his own support line. He might want to leave room for this Sexton. And, I mean, he knows what his opponent has. He knows it's just the Sendai. And underneath that is another Blackwatch. That Wellington draw is going to be pretty good. And here, you can play Wolfpack without discarding anything, because it will still trigger the opponent does not draw a card. So that will still give Leo essentially an extra turn to set up anything he wants.
And I will note that if Leo did go for the second 85th Pioneer, PyTorch would have had the opportunity to move up this Sendai and deny Leo the opportunity to get this Blackwatch back. So it does make sense to not play the second one in a lot of ways. although I'm still a little disappointed. Hopefully we'll see it played before the game ends here.
And here, Leo just plays out the Wellington. It's
Oh.
not attacking, but he knows his opponent's not drawing a card. So he knows that it's going to stick, and with the research draw, he can use it to heal off of 5. Nothing in PyTorch's deck is going to be able to deal 5 through a guard, so he doesn't really need to be worried about his health total. He's going to go for the healing anyways, because, I mean, if PyTorch draws into a 2-card setup, or if PyTorch is able to draw into a Fade Retreat and suddenly has access to everything. However, I think this might be a little too cautious. He probably could have just gone for the synthetic rubber and set up a guaranteed way out of this game. He's going to move up the Blackwatch, but he annihilates the Sendai to get back the second Blackwatch.
And I think this is a bit of a punish. I would have liked to see PyTorch move up that Sendai last turn, as soon as there was the opportunity to deny that Blackwatch coming back down for Leo. However, of course, it does not look like it is going to be a big difference. Leo, with another bit of a misplay.
This is lethal.
Yeah.
Oh, no, not quite, because the Fury on the Blackwatch, it's still lethal. It doesn't actually need to buff the attack of all of the attacking units. And that is game 1 in favor of Leo. And with 1 or 2 odd little quirky plays here and there, I thought Leo had a very, very strong understanding of this discard deck. And, I mean, it's been banned throughout the tournament up until now, and this is just showing why it has been banned. This deck is so scary.
Sometimes you just got to attack with the air units first for the BM. Make your opponent think they've still got a chance.
And I thought PyTorch had a couple shaky plays there in that first game. Maybe it's nerves, maybe it's unfamiliarity on Feigned Retreat in particular. Remember, PyTorch has less than 400 games total in cards. That is from when they start playing ranked after completing the tutorial. They have less than 400 games. So they can't be an expert on every deck. And maybe it's unfamiliarity, maybe it's being in the finals of their very first tournament, but he's going to need to get those nerves under control, because this is going to be a Soviet-France mirror match. Strap in, this is going to be a very, very long one.
Jking, I think you've done 400 games in a season before.
I think no one has done twice that in a season before.
This is pretty awkward for PyTorch. He's keeping a lot of these expensive units in his opening hand, which you can understand in a control mirror because you're looking for this value, but you don't want to just be passing either. So I feel like this second Rima might have been a little much. It's a little awkward to play this Petliakov into a Chaika.
Yeah, it's an incredibly greedy mulligan from PyTorch, and from Leo, it's quite the opposite. Leo mulliganing looking, it seems like, for a decent curve. And, I mean, we'll see how it works out, because PyTorch's mulligan, it can definitely be understood as a risk of you're keeping these very, very big cards, so that you know your opponent's not going to be able to put out a ton of pressure early, and then you're hoping that once you get to 5 credits, 6 credits, you're just going to be able to slap a bomb after bomb and blow your opponent off the board before they have an opportunity to really turn this into a 40-turn grind. However, with the power of these Rimas, if you play a couple of these unassuming 2-drops early in the game, that's not doing a lot, but then you play your on-curve Rima, suddenly it's not just an on-curve Rima, it's an on-curve Rima that's giving Mobilize to 2 units.
Yeah, this first rifle is one of the most valuable cards in the deck. It just gives so much in terms of stats, and it sort of negates a lot of the downsides of the Petliakov on turn 3 into the Chaika, because how is Leo going to get through all of that? And the double 83rd, now that the Petliakov is online, also quite awkward to see.
And in this position, PyTorch is taking a very, very dominant lead in this game just based on development. For as long as this Petliakov sticks on the board, PyTorch is in an amazing spot, because if we look at Leo's hand, it's 2 Naval Brigades and a 39th Rifle Regiment. Those are all deployment effects, and nothing is going to get through a Rima and a 1st Rifles at the moment. And the main full board clear in this deck is the Winter Warfare ISU, another deployment effect. So if this Petliakov could stick on the board, and PyTorch is able to just play bomb after bomb, he's locking Leo out of those comeback potential.
One thing I will say is I would have liked to see these units deployed on the other side of the HQ. Because when this 1st rifle dies, it always goes to the right side of the HQ, no matter what. Which means that once the 2nd rifle comes out from it, you're gonna have a really hard time getting the mobilized effect from this Rima on it as easily as with these other units on the left side.
That's a very good point. And not only that, but it's also removing a guard from this Petliakov, whereas if the Petliakov and the 1st rifles had been played on the right side of the HQ, the 2nd rifles would come in and still be guarding the Petliakov, because it will always come in on the right, adjacent to the HQ. And this just is immediately showing just how complex these control mirrors can be. PyTorch is being punished for the side of the HQ he played his Petliakov on turn 3. And that's just not something that on turn 3 you're just thinking, this card costs 3, I'm going to play it. You're not thinking, well, like 4 turns down the line, I want my Rima and my 1st rifle to be buffing this. And it just goes to show what you have to have in mind. And with the 2nd Rima on board, Leo is needing to deal damage to all of these things to keep the mobilize off of them. And he's still not able to kill either of these Rimas. He is going to get a draw off the Yak if he chooses to trade it off. And PyTorch is sort of stuck now, because as long as this 1st Rifles is here, he doesn't want to overcommit onto the board, and he wants to keep these Rimas back to still be giving mobilize, so he can't easily develop his board further than this. But at the moment, PyTorch's board, everything is mobilized, his Petliakov is growing, these Rimas are growing, and Leo's hand is full of a bunch of cards he doesn't want to play.
Yeah, and that's one of the things about this Rima, is that you really want to have enough control of the board to be knocking out the mobilize effect when it comes down. Because if you're able to do that, the card isn't that powerful. It's when you have just a little bit of a lead on board already that your opponent isn't able to deal with the mobilize when it comes out, which Leo is not able to do. But he is able to limit PyTorch's development even further with this Scorched Earth.
Yeah, Scorched Earth, after pushing up a Bryansk regiment and getting an Engineers battalion onto the board, PyTorch is not going to be winning anytime soon. However, at this point, it's difficult to see how Leo can ever win this as long as this Petliakov is on the board. Leo has to find a defend in depth before this Petliakov is buffed out of range by the mobilize. And PyTorch decides to take a hit onto the Bryansk, place his own Scorched Earth just to get a card out of his hand. I mean, he's sitting at 7, but this will mean he has more room to play card draw in the following turns if a partisan comes out to return something to his hand, which is another way to at least partially get rid of this Petliakov. And Leo draws another deployment effect. And that's just unfortunate, because it's not like Leo's deck is full of deployment effects. There's very, very limited deployment effects in his deck. He's just managed to find almost every single one of them.
We do see here that PyTorch's 2nd Rifles could have had mobilize here with a little bit different play, positioning on the right side. So it was turn 3 when the decision was made, and turn 7 when the decision was punished. Which is really just the beautiful thing about control mirrors.
Beautiful to some. And I think this is also going to perfectly display why a lot of players do not choose to bring decks like Soviet France Control, even if their power cannot be denied. And here, because PyTorch hit into the Bryansk, Leo is able to trade with his own Bryansk to take out one of the Rimas. However, this also opens up a spot in his support line. He can now play something else. He can play an armored train to start getting mobilized if he really wants to. He can just slam the 270 seconds. This is a very aggressive play that could potentially be punished very hard if Leo is able to find a Partisans, because the 272nd played onto the board. If your opponent does Partisans plus Red Banner, your 272nd, the best unit in your deck, suddenly turns into 2 Joseph Stalin tanks for the opponent. It is the main swing in this mirror. You never want to play the 272nd while there is a Partisans in your opponent's deck. This is a massive, massive blunder by PyTorch. It is difficult to understate how much of a potential blunder this is. This has given Leo a way back into this game if he's able to find a Partisans.
And Leo has never had an opportunity to play Partisans that he would have taken. So it's not like PyTorch has a huge reason to not think that it's in his opponent's hand, especially when it's been so bricked over these past few turns. But Leo doesn't play it this turn, so PyTorch can be pretty confident. Well,
it is worth
you could have moved up the T60 and played Partisans and Red Banner. I think you would have taken that opportunity if you had it, right?
It is worth noting that Leo runs 1 Partisans and it's 1 Red Banner. So it's 2 one-offs in your opponent's deck that punishes this play. However, you don't really have a way to kill off your own 272nd anytime soon. And your opponent has engineers, which you can't really deal with at the moment. So this game you are winning this game, and it's not going to end anytime soon.
And that's a huge draw. The Petliakov nearly had made its way out of range.
The 6-7 Petliakov is finally taken out by a defend in depth. And we see this Soviet France deck, this is what it does. It stalls out the game. We're on turn 10. That Petliakov was played on turn 3 and locked Leo out of most of his cards. However, the Petliakov has finally died. Leo has actually gained health from where he started at. And he has more units on board than his opponent. He has more cards in hand than his opponent. And suddenly, PyTorch's huge imposing board with the 2 Rimas, the Petliakov that couldn't be killed, all of that is gone, and it is crumbling fast. And now he just needs to cling on to this 272nd and really, really, really hope that your opponent does not find their Partisans.
I'm a little curious about that trade. I feel like you would be more inclined to trade off your fighter, your Ishak, into the front line to pop off that mobilize and play a Bryansk. He was at 6 credits, so he was able to do that.
I think the idea is he's wanting to get this T-34 into his hand as a potential piece of removal, and keeping the Ishak as an ability to reach the support line. If that does come up, he can take the mobilize off this 272nd in the future, for example, or if another Rima gets played. I assume that is the idea. And we see the Petliakov has been removed. Deployment effects can activate again, and it's actually PyTorch who is going to take the first use of that, stealing his opponent's engineers with the 39th Rifles Regiment. But looking at Leo's hand, we know that engineers might be coming right back in a turn or two.
And it's a little more risky to move up this 272nd because it makes Partisans a little easier to play. But I think you have to do it. You're on the clock for your opponent to find those 2 cards, or for you to get the Joseph Stalin out of this 272nd. So I would have liked to see it move up and start doing some work.
And we see a Spiraling draw from Leo. This is going to open another avenue of play. So far, it's all been about controlling the board. But depending on what Leo gets out, and he gets the US research, which means in several turns from now, he is going to have access to the nuclear bombs, which, I mean, it doesn't really matter how much Rima mobilize you've gotten off. It's going to be difficult to protect your units from the nukes. However, this 272nd right now goes through 2 nukes, and then leaves an 8-8 tank. However, an 8-8 tank is not going to do much versus 30 health and a handful of guards in removal.
Yeah, the 83rds and the ISU, if you're not using Partisans and Red Banner, they are the next best thing for dealing with this 272nd and the Joseph Stalin that comes out afterwards. PyTorch may be thinking knocking off the Mobilize will be useful to keep it at 4 health for potentially a Winter Offensive turn in the future.
Pushes up his units, plays Scorched Earth, and then plays Call to the Colonies for healing, which, I mean, I suppose it's because he's banking on the idea of drawing with Phony War, and he might be aware that this game could go to fatigue, in which case you don't want to have drawn any extra cards. Get the healing out of the Call to the Colonies, and if you need any extra draw, you use Phony War for it. I've played a handful of these Soviet France mirrors before, and they usually do end in fatigue. But I don't know if this one's going to fatigue. Looking at Leo's hand compared to PyTorch's hand, it's definitely going to end soon. But, I mean, PyTorch has spent so many resources, and Leo has been able to respond to all of them with so little. He still has 2 naval brigades in hand, and an ISU.
Yeah, and you don't have much incentive to not keep greeting them. Like, it's not like you're worried about a Blitzkrieg coming out and dying the next turn. You know, it's not one of those kinds of matchups. And just playing the raw 52k.
Yeah, you know, I believe the only air unit in PyTorch's deck is the Petlyakov. He might have a Yak. So this is 52k is not going to be doing a lot, and Leo decides he just wants to invest into research twice, and at 9 cards in hand, playing out the 52k does mean he does not overdraw on the following turn.
Yes, so it is the 2 Petliakovs and the Yak 9. There are not even any Chaikas in PyTorch's deck. I suppose you could also consider Heroes of the Soviet Union can give you
the Tomahawk or the Yak 7.
That seems unlikely, however.
And PyTorch, he's broken through the guards for now. He's hit face for 15. He's dealt half of his opponent's health total. But, I mean, there's 3 more guards to come. There's 3 destruction effects. He's got nukes. He can even go for penicillin if he wants. He can call to the colonies. This engineers is still on board.
Yeah, but this 83rd, the credits really work out very well here to trade off everything. Get your artillery back guarded. And I think PyTorch, the reason he probably didn't trade last turn, I think, is because he was making it impossible for Partisans and Red Banner to come out getting 2 Joseph Stalins. I would believe is the reason to not trade.
I mean, I think it might also just be that PyTorch recognizes the situation he's in and that he needs to go face. And here, I honestly would expect just to see the Winter Offensive come out. Remove your opponent's board, you pressure face, you drop them to 11, then you know your Stalin's probably going to die. However, you have a full board clear in hand, and you know you've limited your opponent's access to healing greatly. And Heroes of the Soviet Union finds a second 272nd, and he immediately goes for the Winter Offensive play. He knows he's got a second Joseph Stalin inside that 272nd that can come up even if this first one dies. And, I mean, we saw Leo's Heroes of the Soviet Union. It did find the Naval Brigade, which is a premium piece of removal, but PyTorch's Heroes of the Soviet Union found the 272nd, which requires 2 pieces of premium removal to deal with. So PyTorch coming up on that one, but he's not at the most health either, and he decides he's going to let the ISU rip now.
Yeah, he does find an engineer battalion. We've seen a lot of them so far this game, and a lot of them being traded back and forth. Like trading cards that I suppose they are, in a sense.
And Leo's only reliable way of dealing with this ISU is to play his own ISU, which does drop himself down to just 9 health. So the health totals are getting low, the boards are getting cleared. However, they still have so many resources still in hand.
Yes,
And
but
KV and Phony War means that PyTorch now has access to 6 damage of burst in his hand that he can play out at any point. I suspect we are just going to see him play out the 272nd. If you weren't playing around partisans before, I don't think you're playing around partisans now. I mean, you're in a arguably worse situation.
yeah, and you already have seen that Leo didn't have the combo earlier. With just a few more draws since the last time.
And you know, with this 272nd hitting the board, your opponent's likely not going to start healing. They're likely going to start spamming out guard units, or they're going to start drawing cards looking for ways to deal with it. And at this point, you don't want your opponent to heal. You want your opponent to empty their hand as much as possible so this KV and Phony War can just kill them.
But we might be seeing nukes coming out from Leo. It's all infantry, so it's not a ton of pressure. But opting for a bunch of guards, which is certainly reasonable when you're in a precarious spot.
However,
Is this
is one-off lethal for PyTorch. He can force Leo to draw 3 draws, which is 6 damage from the KV, and then the natural draw at the start of his turn brings him to 1 health if that's what he goes for. And in the process, it will draw PyTorch 6 cards, which means he can draw into a Winter Warfare for lethal.
And it also denies using penicillin for healing at the same time. I really like the look of this line.
Yep, you're not doing a whole lot else with this turn. And there's a Winter Warfare in his deck for lethal. There's still 1 left.
It is a little unfortunate for PyTorch that Leo has found both of these Call to the Colonies, but he didn't find the last Partisans, which would have been probably the best card for him to see.
This call is going to come out. He might even defend in depth the KV. You're under absolutely no rush to kill this 272nd if you're Leo. And from this point, that's really the only burst that this deck has. It's Winter Offensive and KV plus any forced draws, not counting things off of research. But obviously, if you get them off of research, you're going to have intel on them. You're going to really expect them. So Leo is pretty comfortable now. He can just sit back. He can even heal again if he wants to. And on the following turn, he can just add nukes to his hand. And at any point, if he finds partisans, he just gets 2 free tanks and wins the game.
You know, it would be really funny if we saw this Liberation come out and it destroyed the 1 copy of Partisans. Crazier things have happened.
I mean,
it's unlikely that that's what you want to do this turn, but it's hard to see what you want to do. You have so many cards in hand, and yet so little options. So few good options, anyways. You can look for the research. You can try to develop a research into something big, but it really depends on what nation you get. Britain would probably be the least relevant. German is pretty good.
Yeah, with German, you're definitely not mad, and you can beat your opponent to nukes if you're willing to take an overdraw. Your opponent will get nukes in hand, but then you will be able to discard them twice, which is going to be pretty relevant in this matchup. And here he's going to take out the Rima with the defend in depth. And, I mean, the U-boat, the tier 3 research is quite strong, but he can also just go for a urine project. I mean, he's certainly under no threat of dying anytime soon. He's at 22 with an engineers. And urine project will just take out everything, regardless of how many times it's been buffed by Rima.
And the engineers and the armored train is a very good combo for gaining a lot of defense on your HQ. I've been upset about that combo more times than I'd like to admit.
And here from Leo, you don't know what research your opponent has yet, but you know your opponent has access to research, and you're still cognizant of how much health you are at. You know, if you just give your opponent a Stalin, like if you play nukes next turn, you can always just die to partisans to take the armored train, and then the tank hits face for 8, plus a winter warfare. Leo is not out of the woods yet in terms of his health total. So regardless of how large his units are, he can't be too comfortable yet.
And for as long as PyTorch keeps this research at GRE, Leo has to keep in mind every possible research of the GRE, which all have very different impacts on his game plan. Like, even a Bletchley Park against the armored train and the spawning of the light infantry is concerning.
But he's going to reveal the research now, develop it up to 3, and brace for impact of these nukes. I mean, he's almost going to be able to clear after just the first nuke and trading. However, this armored train will be left at 1, and this ISU is 1 damage off of being able to trade with the Joseph Stalin.
I almost wonder, do you need to use the nukes yet? I mean, you can develop another research, you can heal up. It's a little risky knowing the discard from the U-boat in PyTorch's hand if he does not opt for Urun Project. But it's a lot of cards in hand.
Yeah, and you can also just take out this armored train if you want to. You know your opponent doesn't really want to trade.
Yeah, they don't want to develop their board anymore.
However, he's going to play the first nuke. He's going to take out this engineers and just develop more guards.
Get some units to the front line, make it harder for this Joseph Stalin to connect to the HQ. Although, at the same time, you are losing your Ishak from this strikeout, which is minor, but it feels bad.
And PyTorch here, do you ever just develop the Urine project?
Do you mean and not play it, or do you mean to play it on something like this ISU or Armored Train?
No, not the U-boat, the Urine project.
Oh, the Urine project. That is fair. It specifically targets your opponent's side of the board.
Yeah, so your opponent will still be forced to, and that's exactly what he does. This might be an OCC first. I'm not sure if we've ever seen a Urine project before, and that's pretty crazy, because I'm certain we have seen every single other tier of research across all 3 researches, but Urine project is one you do not see often, and I think it's criminally underrated.
Yeah, well, it has a situation that's good, and this is it. It's when there's not a lot of pressure on the board, not destroying your own side of the board matters, and there's a lot of high-value targets for your opponent.
And we see another nuke come out. It's going to take out all the guards, drop PyTorch to just 6 health, but I don't think... I mean, actually, Leo can just push face for 10. This ISU can just connect for 10.
Yeah,
and then you're threatening lethal. If Urine project gets played, you win the game.
That's true. That is certainly a tempting proposition.
And he sees it. He goes for it. He's just going to drop PyTorch to 5, and PyTorch knows this. He sees the T-34 in hand. And he finds his own partisans. He's found his own red banner, but it's not going to do anything. And he can trade out the ISU and start healing up. He doesn't need to play the Urine project anytime soon. He knows his opponent can't commit to the board. This armored train can't connect face, so it doesn't really matter how large this armored train is. It's not really doing anything. So PyTorch can just trade out the ISU and play a Liberation, and I mean, he can even Confusion to take out the 2 light infantry in the front line if he wants to.
Yeah. Well, you're also pretty confident that you're not wanting to draw any cards anymore, so it's pretty easy to use these Call for the Colonies just for the +8 defense rather than to draw 2 cards. Because we
Something
are
else you could
nearly
do
at fatigue.
is you could... Oh, you're not quite able to. And you are low on health, so he is just going to go for the Liberation. Heal up 9. And, I mean... I would like... I mean, there's so few cards in your opponent's deck that you would like to see, and he runs out of time before he can actually attack with the light infantry. So he plays the Confusion, but it's just making room in his hand, which is actually a potentially big deal because your opponent is running Phony Wars, I believe. So not having a Confusion in your hand means you draw 1 more card when a Phony War gets played, which is usually a good thing.
Not necessarily, though.
yeah, this is a matchup where you're both running really low on cards, and yeah, you're a little bit worried, but here Leo recognizes the situations he's in. He's saying, I can commit more to the board if I'm bringing you below 5 or 5 or lower while I'm doing it, because again, Urine Project, if it gets played, Leo will get another T-34 from the T-60. So PyTorch, once again, cannot play it, and he's being punished for not healing at the end of his previous turn, for not trading out 2 less... he would have taken 2 less damage if the Confusion had connected. And that is really, really big. If PyTorch had healed 8, if he had 4 extra credits this turn and he can just play the Urine Project, this is a very different game.
Yeah, but this is... Looks like it's gonna be another decent chunk of damage coming through. And Leo is going to have some nice burst in his hand this game. With both the Winter Warfare, the Winter Offensive, and this other T-34 from his T-60.
And Leo healing and going for the Spy Ring. I would have liked to have seen the Spy Ring come out first. However, I think going for the healing is a very smart play. Recognizing that 9 health, with some of the cards that exist in this deck, 9 health is not the highest. You can be put into these awkward situations like the ones PyTorch has been in the last couple turns where you want to play a high value card, but if you don't heal on the same turn, you're just going to die. So getting the healing out of the way now for Leo, and here PyTorch can finally play the Urine Project if he wants to.
Yeah, something I find interesting. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Something very interesting here is that Leo does not play the resistance in his hand, which he could have done if he wanted to prevent overdrawing, but he opts to take the 2 damage rather than another random card from his deck.
And losing the Night Witches, that is actually somewhat substantial because he still has a Rima. So Night Witches is 3 extra bodies while your opponent is running very low on cards. However, I believe Leo is slightly ahead on fatigue at the moment. So, I mean, everything is just looking up for Leo right now. And PyTorch, it looks like all of the burst that you know your opponent has, these Intel T-34s, they're all gone. However, you know your opponent still has a Winter Offensive in their deck, so you have to heal more. And I think that's the last of his healing.
And you've seen most of the deck, too, so there's a very good chance that Winter Offensive's there. I think it's been there nearly since the very start of this game.
And there's the Phony War from Leo, and that... I mean, that is just essentially as good as game. He can force PyTorch to draw through the rest of his deck, and suddenly PyTorch is going to be on a 2-turn clock, a 3-turn clock, and it's not going to matter because Leo, look at Leo's hand. He has so much guard, he has so much removal, he doesn't need to play for burst, he can just play for time.
And that's one of the reasons why, in this kind of matchup, having the resistances in hand can sometimes be an advantage rather than a detriment. And he's not going for it, and it
Leo
sort
had
of
the opportunity to put PyTorch onto fatigue that turn.
Yeah, but I suppose he's also thinking that PyTorch can't just not play cards. So this phony war is still going to be relevant. He's maybe waiting until he can calculate lethal with it, give less options when he uses it.
That is true, but there is cards in these decks that generate cards. Cards like Night Witches, where you can play the Night Witches and then not play any of the Polycarpovs that are generated off of it. And you're just using Night Witches to essentially put 2 extra cards into your hand to then not play, to stop Phony War from drawing you. But this is also just showing how much further into his deck than Leo PyTorch is, and that's a result of these plays he made very early on into the game, where he was going for these greedier lines, getting more onto the board, taking these big risks. And I mean, it all came crumbling down when Leo finally found one of his answers to the Petliakov.
Well, wait 1 minute, jking 7, because PyTorch does not run Night Witches in his deck. So that is not a concern for Leo in this situation.
Yeah, I think that in that case, that just further goes to show I think Leo really should have just played Phony War last turn. You put your opponent drawing into 1 fatigue. I mean, like, there was nothing that can make you lose the game by playing Phony War right there. And we see the rest of Leo's deck. There's a Ural Factories, that's not going to do a lot. A Defend in Depth, that's not going to do a lot. Aspiring, you're not going to have enough time to use whatever you get off of the Spiring, because the only form of healing off of Spiring is Radar Alert and Penicillin, and they both draw cards. And PyTorch is just dead next turn, and he has no healing in hand. There's no healing he can get. Radar Alert keeps him alive for 1 turn, but that's just going to be it. And Leo takes this game, and I mean, in a game that
does
long,
not keep him alive any longer.
Oh, that is true. That is true. Yes. And I mean, in a long game like this, like, every side is going to make mistakes. Every side is going to have things where they look back and think, well, I could have done that differently. You play in a 25-minute game. That's going to happen. But I think overall, Leo played very, very convincingly. And I mean, there's a lot to be said about draws and mirror matches. I think if you played that game, the way those 2 players played those games like that, I think Leo was going to win the vast majority of the time, because it just looked like he had a better grasp of the matchup, a better grasp of how the deck operates. And now PyTorch needs to win 3 in a row against US midrange, which, I mean, his Soviet deck, this is definitely a favorable matchup. This is definitely gonna start off strong. I suspect that we are gonna start off with a win here for him, but after that, he has to beat US frontline with air and then with Feigned Retreat Jaguar, which all possible, but not easy.
What is also important is that this is almost certainly one of his more practiced matchups. When you're playing on ladder with a control deck like this, trying to get some experience on the deck, you very rarely are running into other very heavy control decks of a similar style. And it makes it just a lot harder to practice those kinds of matchups.
And especially because the tournament like caliber players are almost exclusively playing aggro. So even if you do queue into a control deck, it might be a non-meta list, a list that is way more anti-aggro, or a list that's way more heavy control. Or it might just be being played by somebody who's just fooling around, having some fun in cards, not taking it seriously. And you playing against somebody who is trying their hardest to beat you is very different than playing against somebody doing their dailies. And PyTorch goes for the early Spiring, and he gets the US research, and he just goes straight for depth charges. He's looking at his hand, and I mean, US research, it can get you into nukes, and nukes are very, very powerful against US midrange, but
how in the world are you playing nukes this game when there's this much pressure, your hand?
You need to survive 7 more turns to play nukes, and you're using a lot of credits during those turns to develop into nukes. And US frontline can kill you very, very quickly if you don't play cards.
Especially when your one board clear in hand deals damage to you.
And I quite like this from Leo playing out the Greyhound rather than the 32nd, meaning that he goes down in hand size. His hand size goes down from 5 to 4, whereas the 32nd draws another one and replaces itself. And this means PyTorch cannot take out this 4-5 Red Devils with the Defendant Devs.
Yeah, that is very clever. I hadn't actually considered that. And I don't think I would have typically considered that sort of thing in that situation. So that's really well done from Leo to consider that. Especially in such a high stress environment.
Yeah, Leo, I mean, this is his second tournament performance. His second tournament appearance. And he's up 2-0 in the finals. And the last time he showed up, he went straight to the finals and beat Tang Tang in the finals. So Leo is just showing an incredible caliber of play and showing that you do not need to be playing in these tournaments constantly every single month after month. You can just show up, and if you have put in the work, you have put in the effort. I mean, I don't know how many games in particular Leo has played this month, but I mean, judging on his play, I don't know if it's on ranked or if it's just in scrims with some practice partners, but Leo is showing an incredible amount of comfort and insight onto every single deck he's operating and playing against every single deck brought by his opponents.
And he is also very fortunate in the spot that PyTorch is finding so few guards and no 39th, no engineers, which is also making a big difference in this game. If PyTorch had 39th last turn onto those Red Devils, that definitely could have been a turning point.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing about playing against Soviet control is you usually have to take risks. You can't play around every single elite. And I mean, yeah, sometimes you have them, like we saw Noen against you, Berto. They have it, and you get punished really, really hard, and there's nothing you can do about it. And sometimes they don't have it. Sometimes the decks just crumble. I mean, Defendant Depth, it's a very powerful tool when your opponent's hand is very large, but it's not very good against a wide board. It's not very good against a opponent with a small hand where they're just playing out everything quickly. And healing 8, but your opponent is left with 8 damage on the board. So you're really just delaying it at the moment. But Winter Offensive in hand.
And Leo has had a lot of turns to draw these 30 seconds that are still in his deck, and he is not. We'll see if he tries to keep avoiding the risk. It does not look like it.
Yeah, he's getting out the Whirlwind. I'm not a huge fan of this play because there's very few air units in your deck you're looking to pin, and you're not attacking with the Whirlwind. So you're not putting out a ton of more pressure. Yeah, and with Winter Offensive here, you're losing one of the 2 Blitz cards in your hand, and a Winter Offensive here from PyTorch, you're not feeling super comfortable. You're going down to 6 health. But if you just draw a Rima or draw an Armored Train, and suddenly this game is completely turned on its head. And especially with this Petliakov.
Yeah, Petliakov behind a guard is so difficult for US frontline to deal with. They can do okay if they run patrols, but I need to check if Leo runs any patrols in his list.
And
it does not look like it.
PyTorch
so that's going to be a huge issue.
At 2 health, but Engineers draw now Bryansk to protect the Petliakov, and he's going to need another draw. But his deck is so many large guard units that you imagine he's going to get one. And Leo, suddenly these 2 Shermans in hand have been turned off. This 32nd does not draw. A 3rd Sherman, that's not going to draw. He needed a strategic bomb in there.
Well, he has Stars and Stripes, and he has this single damage ping from the dive bombing, so he's able to get rid of the Petliakov, which is absolutely massive.
However, it will mean that this Engineers is going to stick for the rest of the game, most likely. However, in this current situation, you see your opponent's on 2 cards in hand. Now, maybe one of those 2 cards is a Phony War, and suddenly they're on 8 cards in hand, and slamming down guards every turn. But maybe it's not a Phony War. And Confusion Draw is very big pickup from PyTorch.
Yeah, and I imagine you're decently content with a Liberation to heal for 7 afterwards. It doesn't mean you're not denying the front line. Oh, going for a denying of the front line.
Yeah, PyTorch
That's
says no.
reasonable.
Doesn't want to see any 5th Rangers up there. Doesn't. This also, importantly, does stop Hellcat completely.
Yeah, and if there were any Blitz units in Leo's hand, like Red Devils, for example, it is quite important that you're denying those Sherman draws still, if Leo has any in hand, which of course we can see he's got a couple.
And
3 of 4.
PyTorch is thinking, and I don't know if it's thinking about the red banners or thinking about pushing up the engineers. I don't think he should do either. He plays it, he gets the howitzer, that's going to kill his own engineers, and it's not particularly more difficult to remove than the Bryansk was. I think that's another potential huge blunder from PyTorch. He had his back up against the wall. It was definitely not looking favored for him either way, but playing that red banner there.
Yeah, and one of the things that you can do one of the things that you can do with red banner and Bryansk irregulars is you can attack into a unit and then red banner your own Bryansk irregulars to kill something from your opponent's side. So he was also losing that opportunity.
Going face means that yes, if one of these Shermans attack into it, it will die. However, if your opponent has any form of blitz, and we see Leo does.
Yeah. Yeah, and the damage to the HQ doesn't seem like it's going to be relevant for a while. Unless you get some...
if the Stalin is in the front line, you're typically just winning anyways. It doesn't matter if you're killing your opponent in 2 turns or 3 turns, and that doesn't actually change the clock at all either. If you get the Stalin, it's still a 2-turn lethal. And the half-track gets picked up off the 3rd Sherman. And, PyTorch, it doesn't...
He's greeting with the Liberation. That seems pretty crazy.
I thought PyTorch had a very strong showing in the semifinal, but I don't know if it's the pressure that's gotten to him or what, but he's just falling apart here under the constant assault from Leo. And Leo is just... It does not appear to be getting to Leo particularly. Leo is just showing very strong play.
Yeah, I almost wonder if you want to get rid of the 272nd to play around Red Banner. Of course, there's very few cards in PyTorch's hand, but
there is no Red Banner though. He's seen it. It was
played on right. Of course, I forgot. How silly am I?
And ISU pickup. That's gonna let him.
That's big.
That is huge. That is absolutely huge. It's going to set up lethal on board. It's going to clear out these Shermans. Now, Leo, we're looking at his hand. We see he does have 6 burst in hand. He's going to be able to clog the front line. And suddenly your health total, you really wish you had Liberation for 7. Those 2 opportunities you had to. Because now Leo has several top decks for lethal. Whirlwind top deck is lethal. Blitzkrieg top deck is lethal, and that's a Blitzkrieg. That is going to be a 3-0 for Leo, punishing PyTorch. And wow. Just wow. Leo getting those 25 points.
With a clean 3-0.
You know, jking, you mentioned PyTorch maybe falling apart a bit in the finals. Do you think any of it had to do with a bit of... I'm kind of exhausted after that control game, and I'm down 2-0, and I just want this to be over. Put me out of my misery.
Maybe by the way it was played, that's entirely possible. Leo dropped 1 game that entire tournament. He went 7-1 against myself, against no one, in that crazy mirror matchup where he was behind for so long. Even if even if PyTorch had played out the Liberation, he hadn't played out the Red Banner, he had clung on and won that game, I think Leo winning this OCC clash was an inevitability. He showed up here to win. I think he had the best lineup out of the 8 players, and I mean, looking at his play, he was rock solid.
Absolutely, and we just saw the bracket, right? The names he took out, yourself included. It's not like he had an easy path to the finals either, so had a heck of a run here, and could be picking up 25 points. Of course, you mentioned did not participate in the February event, so those 25 points are going to put him, what, in 3rd place, probably?
Yes. So, based on my calculations and based on last month's points total, it should be head currently in the leaderboards with 33 points, with a 1st place finish in a top 8, followed by Birdo Burrito at 30 points with 2 3rd place finishes. And then sitting in 3rd is going to be Leo with those 25 points from winning. And that is quite huge.
Absolutely. You know, you can go take another month off now. Pretty much, maybe not entirely cemented, but pretty darn close to being a lock here for the first ever Officer Club Clash Ultimate, I think. Clash Ultimate, sorry. OTC Ultimate. I'm going to call it the Ultimate. Getting tongue-tied here.
And, I mean, I think that's going to make some players nervous. Some of these veterans, like Birdo, who's pretty much guaranteed into the Ultimate, is going to make the players like himself start to question, like, well, maybe this Ultimate isn't quite as easy as I might have expected, or it's not going to be like the 4 good players and then 4 other players. Like, Leo has not been playing KARDS competitive for months and months and months. He played once last year, and looking at this performance here, I think anybody is going to be scared to get up against him in the first round.
Berto, you just made a face that was, I never assumed the Ultimate would be even remotely easy.
Yeah, like, who do you think I am? That's like, oh yeah, whittled down from the best performers in the 3 OCCs, which is already difficult to get into in the first place. Yeah, no, that's gonna be pretty free. Like, I feel like some words were put into my mouth that I had not said.
I don't know. I would turn that around and say if anybody's maybe a bit nervous, maybe some of those veterans who are below Leo in the point total, like this gentleman sitting in the middle here, might be a little bit nervous, thinking, "Hey, I need to perform in this 3rd clash to make sure I make it to the Ultimate."
Yeah, I'm sitting down at 16 points, not doing too shabby, but definitely not a guaranteed ticket. Unlike Head, unlike Birdo, and most likely unlike Leo.
So we've got one more of these clashes to come. We have the clash for April, and then the points are going to be divvied up, and that's going to determine who's going to play in our first ever Ultimate. So thank you all for tuning in. jking, Birdo, an absolute pleasure. Leo, a phenomenal performance. So check us out again next month. In the meantime, you can also go to the KARDS website and see all the point totals and start, doing your own fantasy drafting to figure out who is going to be at our first ever OCC Ultimate.